Hi, and welcome to this podcast with your host, Miriam Khan. Today, I am so honoured to have Dr. Shahd Alshammari on the show. Welcome. And I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Sometimes the Yorkshire accent likes to say it in a different way. Welcome.
Thank you, Miriam. No, you did. It's exactly right.
Awesome. Now, I met you a while back doing a speaking event at this school that I work in, and it was a beautiful connection to be introduced to. But prior to that, I did a little bit of research when you were coming in to get to know you, and I was really honoured to come across this lady who's written so many literary texts and also is helping our community out in the Middle East as well to have this love and passion for literature. And also your ethnic minority, and that to me, and female, and happens to also be on the support wagon of people with disabilities. So for me, I was like, a thumbs up, you know. May I ask, how did you get into literature? What was your passion? Where did it start from?
So thank you for that really nice introduction. I'm really happy that you said, trying to help her community. I think for a lot of people, they look at, teaching and authorship as just a job. Yes. But, for me, living in the Middle East, growing up here, I'm half Kuwaiti, half Palestinian. So I'm a hybrid. And, I grew up in English speaking schools. I've always kind of felt out of place. I've always kind of felt, like I'm trying to create a sense of belonging somehow. And, the older I got, once I got into teaching, I started realizing that, I wasn't the only one feeling this way. There's this bit of a generational gap between younger people and their parents and their grandparents, and with all of the changes happening in society with social media, it becomes really hard to kind of maintain the same lingo, the same language between these groups. And what I've tried to do in my work is sort of also talk to the youth, talk to people, not just the ones I'm teaching, but readers, in the region and also internationally, trying to cultivate a sense of belonging to not a nation, but a support group, having friends, having a sense of belonging to a community, rather than just these markers, whether it's citizenship, religion, gender, and so on. I fell in love with literature very early on in life. I like I said, I come from a background of having a Palestinian mother and a Kuwaiti father, and the only place I felt I was able to kind of make friends was actually through stories and fairy tales. And my mother would read to me all sorts of stories and then get me to write responses to these stories. And that's when I started realizing that, I didn't need, to have a big group of friends. I didn't need to be invited to every single party. I was just happy to be, at home with my mother and our books, basically. As I grew older, I started realizing that a lot of stories actually had the same kind of narrative. There's a struggle, there's a journey, and then there has to be at the end some sort of wisdom gained or some sort of realization that you come to. And so I woke up one day at the age of 18 and I couldn't walk, I couldn't move. It was a complete paralysis. And pretty soon I was diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis, which was a very, very difficult word for me to even pronounce, multiple sclerosis. I didn't even know what that was at 18. So MS is a neurological illness for those of you listening who may or may not have heard of MS. And it's very common in actually the age group of 18 to 40 years old. That's and it hits women twice as much, and it's they say it's really rare, but actually it's very common, especially in the Middle East and in South Asia. So very interesting actually that the studies and statistics still say it tends to hit Caucasians more, and the Northern Hemisphere, but actually it's very, very common in our part of the world too. And again, having that diagnosis at 18 meant a complete sense of loneliness and a complete sense of sort of like a tragedy that hit at a very unexpected time. You sleep, happily in your bed, cozy, everything's going great, and then you woke up one day and you just can't move. I was otherwise a healthy, young adult. I was playing sports. I was, very, very, active. So there were no indications prior to that.
I can relate. I really can relate, because when I was 11, up till then, I was very sporty, athletic. And then from 11 till, was it 8, just before 18, I was paralyzed on and off. And I was also in a wheelchair throughout that time, like you. And I literally was on my hands crawling because I also, like you, stopped. And it wasn't MS for me. They found out later on in my life through lots of things, believe me. They thought it was a mental illness. I was doing attention seeking from my dad. It was apparently my ankle. There was all the sorts of things happening. It turned out I lost the cartilage in my hip, but it never showed on X-ray. So I totally relate. I totally understand. And alhamdulillah, thank God, whatever your faith is, thank God for 2 hip replacements. I'm better. I can walk. I still have limited ability. I don't know about you. People look at you and think you're able and fit. And I am to a certain degree. However, I have my limitations of what I can and can't do. But I'm grateful to that. But your situation, I know some friends with MS. It's unpredictable. It's very unpredictable with what happens.
And I think it's really important to mention that, with young girls and women generally, when something hits the body, it has a completely different effect and unexpected consequences too. You're suddenly seen as less than, ideal. So it really does affect your sense of self-worth, your sense of self-esteem. And, no matter how resilient you are, or no matter how hard you try to kind of make sense of it, there's always a stigma that society keeps producing.
It's a cultural one as well. It's not just community. I found culturally, like I grew up having 2 cousins. One, bless her's, got Down syndrome. Gorgeous soul. So smart. So smart. I had another one that was like on the autistic and Asperger's spectrum, but also had cerebral palsy. There were some people in our family, but you would never see them. Very, very rarely. And I grew up, I don't know about you, that they were hidden. And sometimes they would come to your house and visit from another city. And I loved them. They had such beautiful, like even when I'm talking to you, you can see my face lighting up. They had just pure innocence and beautiful hearts. But our culture and our society keeps them separate. And I know some of it's protection, but some of it is also they're embarrassed, which is not how it should be, should it?
Absolutely. There's a sense of shame. And it's interesting when you say culture, because it seems to be a universal culture. So, regardless of, which, country you grew up in or where disability and illness is experienced, it seems to be that there's a common understanding of it being shameful. And, whether you're young or old, or, people will look, people will stare, people will comment. There's a lot of judgment surrounding it. And I didn't understand any of that until I was actually put in that position. So I would go to college, and I would be using a cane, and a professor would say, there's no need for you to come to class. If you're in pain, there's no need for you to come to class. And I would just be so humiliated in front of an entire classroom, again with that sense of not belonging, again with that sense of feeling like I shouldn't be here. And to make sense of all of that is very traumatic and very, very difficult to also work with, because your body is you. Your body is the sense of it.
That person making that comment to you, doesn't realize the struggle you've had to get dressed or to be able to get to that place. I can personally recall physically not being able to put my trousers on. I had to have like a stick that I would grab. to dress myself, not being able to get into a shower. Disabled things now in 2023 are better, not 100% in some places, but there was no such thing as like a stair lift, like some houses have. There was no such thing as like a disabled access to get into the shower, like a shower tray that you sit on and shuffle. Those things, even the bar in the bathroom, you know what I'm talking about. Those things weren't there, but they don't realize how hard you've struggled just to get there, and then for someone to say that to you, it's disheartening. They don't understand that you want to be there, you want to be heard and seen. They make you invisible again, which defeats the object, doesn't it? So did you persevere?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, at that age, I can't say I had the right vocabulary for it. I just felt a lot of, I felt a lot of anger and shame more than anything. But honestly, I can't say that I, knew what to do. My mother was very supportive. I was very privileged and blessed, I think, having that kind of support. And I know a lot of people seem to assume that everybody has unconditional love from parents, but it doesn't seem to be the case. No. Parents are not always, these, angelic creatures. Sometimes they add a lot more to the trauma, and sometimes they make things a lot worse. So I was lucky enough for my mother to kind of, understand the disability itself, but also not want to be limited by that definition. So, she kind of sat me down and said, things aren't going to be easy from now on. So she was very blunt, very frank. And, she did say that it would be incredibly hard to go to school, to be able to, to make friends, and to also kind of have what we would call a good life. And of course, depending how you define that good life. But what really kept me going was her will for us, when I say us, meaning her and I both, not to stop. So there was no stopping. So I didn't want to return after that comment at school. I really didn't want to go back. So I hid in bed for about a week until she said, there's no way you're staying, at home for the next week. And I've given you time, because we always need time to kind of, gather our strength again. But a week is too long, and you have to go back. And so I hated her at that moment, and thought, how cruel, know. And it's not that, she had to live with the disability herself. Here she was, an older woman who hadn't experienced it. And I was saying she didn't know what she was talking about. But I'm really relieved now that, she did kind of push me to go back into the environment which I felt rejected from.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of, I continued undergrad at the same university. And then I went abroad to the UK for, a master's in literature and a PhD. And the same thing, within 5 days, I called her up and I said, nope, I'm returning. I'm coming back home. This is a very, very, horrible place. People are treating me badly. It was a very also sense of realizing also the whiteness that I hadn't experienced before.
Where did you study? Which city?
So I was in Exeter in the UK. Yeah. And there was also the sense of, very, very much, these British circles and societies. And, being Muslim, I wasn't going to be invited anywhere or going to fit in.
I mean, some places are very multicultural, but still there's a us versus them. And some places are not. And it's hard intermingling sometimes, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. And that came also as a wake-up call, that it wasn't just, having the disability, but also just, ethnicity and religion was also a big part of why I wasn't getting invited to these gatherings and these parties and so on. So, I decided, this place wasn't for me. And I also wanted to kind of return and to just, return back home to a safe space. And, my mother said she wouldn't talk to me if I, dared to return. So there was, while it seemed like it was a very cruel, kind of harsh method, it worked. That's, I think, where the idea of persevering comes from. A lot of people think persevering is, just strength, but there has to be this push through the pain for you to persevere. whether it's emotional or physical, there has to be a push through the pain, not away from the pain, not ignoring the pain. But I really had to push through the emotional pain of being, different and trying to kind of still hold on. And so that ended up being, part of my journey, that I needed to constantly persevere. The pain was still there, the disability was still there, and that sense of isolation was still there. But I ended up, finding myself through that process. So finding myself through the books, through the literature, through the storytelling, and that's how I ended up teaching literature eventually.
Which is beautiful, because growing up for me, obviously, my core background is English teaching as well, and special educational needs, because that's where my passion has come from. But growing up, I'm obviously first generation born in England. I'm in my middle 40s this year. It's scary to say that, but it is true. And I can recall, like, the brown kids, as we were referred to back in junior school, we were all like clustered together by our teachers back then. And I remember seeing this one lady who was a Jamaican teacher. So you can imagine growing up with everyone white, and there's just one brown person that sort of resembles you but doesn't, if you get what I mean. And what they did was they put all us brown kids together. So we had people from Bangladesh, there was Sikh, we had people from Egypt. There was a cluster, whoever had come, from different places. And they put us all together with this Sikh lady. Now, I was just fascinated by her sari, because the colours were just wonderful.
Beautiful,
to see someone, I'd seen them in Bollywood films back in the day, and I'm talking, 80s, 1980s. And I remember this teacher of mine, who probably meant well, but said, just go with Miss and she'll understand all of you. And I was like, what do you mean? Well, she'll understand your languages. And we all spoke English like I'm speaking now. But I think at that time, they were starting to think of ethnic minority groups. Now in schools, you have EAL, English as a distinct language. It's a box. Like disabilities, it's a box. So who's in the classroom? But I had to say to this teacher, sorry, sir, but Mrs. Sikh, it's a completely different faith, completely different religion. No, it's not. It is, sir. And also, her faith is different to ours. It's fine. We have a mutual trust, and we can understand. But there was still this like sounding rude, backward thinking. Like brown,
absolutely
the same. No, and that was where it clicked for me. I've got to go into teaching. I have to, because how can we have a room like this? You can't. That's where mine came from. So that's why I'm saying to you, it's really beautiful that you persevered. I'm proud of you for that, because you don't realize these journeys have pushed us into different aspects of ourselves.
Absolutely.
So you obviously went through that journey, and you've persevered, you pursued it, and thankfully, you carried on, and you came back to Kuwait. And what did you do since then? Because it's been an amazing journey since that time. Difficult one, I'm sure.
So once I came back to Kuwait, I had come to a realization that disability was not a topic to be spoken about, not just in my country, in my community, but also in the literature that I had read, in the books that I had read. So when I did my PhD, I focused on mad woman protagonists in literature and how madness was presented in literature. And it seemed to me that it wasn't just an English literature type of thing. It wasn't an Arabic literature type of thing. It was, literature everywhere, regardless of the author, regardless of the background of the author. Illness and disability always presented in a very tragic light.
Yes.
And always, the character with any specific illness, whether it was mental or physical, was kind of shunned and rejected, and made to be part of a lesson, like a moral lesson. So if a woman misbehaved, then she would wake up one day blind.
Yes. Or stuck up in an attic and locked up.
Of course, the mad woman in the attic, which I had studied, of course, Jane Eyre, but nobody had ever actually paid attention to what that actually meant. Correct. So we were just looking at Jane Eyre herself as the ideal woman. But depression, mental illness.
Yes.
We never talked about that even in our readings of the text. So I realized that even if I had wanted to teach literature, I also wanted to kind of create new narratives or new stories that could hopefully begin to challenge that idea of illness and disability. At that point, it wasn't about me anymore.
Yes.
And I think that's part of the spiritual journey, that once you realize it's not just that you don't want to be alone, but you also want to extend parts of yourself to others, and kind of, reach out to other people through whatever medium that you have. So you have the podcast to get people to listen and to engage with you in a very vulnerable way.
Yeah.
For me, that was the writing, rather than just the teaching. It was also the writing. So in a way, I felt that storytelling and literature would be the way to kind of start people thinking about disability and illness in a different way. I had also seen a lot of my students, living with epilepsy, with diabetes, with depression and anxiety. And, all of them would really struggle to ask for accommodation in the same way that I had struggled to say, I do need extra time for the exam, my hand isn't working properly, or whatever it was that I wouldn't ask for. So I realized that a big part of it was the shame that had still continued. It wasn't just about me, but it was continuing on to other generations. And it wasn't changing. Educators weren't changing the way they thought of it either.
And I mean, even here, whilst I've been here for like 6 years now, and even in the last couple of years, it has been beautiful to see. It's not everywhere, but I'm starting to see ramps being put in places. I start to see some disabled access. I start to see even disabled spots with the signs. It's so nice that it's happening, at long last. Small changes, but they're there, and I'm sure there's a long way. I know there's a long way to go, And I remember fighting in the UK with my family at the time to just get my disabled access and badge. It's a hard process. And then for me, when I was able to walk, say to my father, it was a big ding dong, Dad, I think it's time now that I return this disabled badge, because you also get a financial allowance as well from the government. You have to. It's not an easy process. And I said, I want to give this back. And he looked at me like, what the hell? Because we'd struggled for years to get that disability. That badge means you can park in disabled bays. It has your picture in now. Didn't used to. Because people lie, God forbid people park in the spot and use it, and their family member goes, they might be collecting them quite rightly from a doctor's surgery, but some people were not. And yet some people pretending to be disabled and are not, if you get my drift. So I decided to return mine, and I was like, he was like, why? And I said, look, I don't need this now. Thankfully, I can walk more than 50 yards. I couldn't before. My back was always bent over. I was like you with a walking stick. Sometimes I'd be in the wheelchair. It depended. I had no, any day would be different. But I felt I need to give that to someone else. Someone else needs it more than me. And thank you, God, for letting me walk again. If I do end up back in the wheelchair, okay, I can go back to option B. But I need to let someone else have that. They need it more, But not everybody thinks like that, do they? Not everybody thinks of others. So it's interesting how you're saying that, because our journey through that is not easy. And sometimes it's not just the shyness and being scared. It's just having the confidence to say, this is my right. This is my right.
Absolutely.
In the UK, we're very lucky. We have disability acts, and we're a Sioux nation. We have Equality Act. We have many, many laws that help them. And some countries always don't have that. Or if they do, they make it difficult,
Difficult, access is very difficult, absolutely.
It's not easy. That's why I'd gone into the special needs background, because when you were talking about accessibility to exams, that should have been a given right. That's one thing I would do as a Senko. I do all the testing for you, and I would ensure that for exams for a student, you get, for example, 20% extra time. Maybe your seat has to be adjusted. Maybe you need something to lean on. Maybe you have to have a laptop. Whatever it is, I had one student, bless him, for nearly a year, in that school that I taught in when I was senior leadership, he was blind in one eye, never said a word from school when he was little. When it came to his results, and I was his Senko at the time, and I was like, there's nothing wrong with discussing what's wrong. What's the issue? And when he gained trust with me, when he knew that I understood and I had to say my background of what happened to me with my leg and my hip, he was like, she gets me. And he was Muslim too, so he understood. He was like, culturally, I can't say. I said, of course you can. And we made adjustments for him. So we were, as soon as he would, and I said, you'd have to get over this. And when he was able to, on each computer, whenever he logged on in the school, the technician, I made sure he'd adjusted the brightness, the letters. It was compulsory. But he was embarrassed. He made sure we got his exam papers and textbooks larger. I said, this is your right. You're allowed extra size paper. You're allowed extra time. This is your right. Take it.
Yeah.
And it took a long time. It took nearly a good 6 months or so to get him slowly to understand, and then getting his relatives on board. But when he did, I was so pleased that when he resat that year, he passed. And he just said to me, thank you. And I said, no, you should thank yourself. Because you found your voice. You found your voice. And I said, now, hopefully when you go to university, you will speak up.
And ask for accommodation.
So I understand what you're saying, because people do suffer and they struggle. And they don't know how to say, this is affecting my mental health. It's affecting my well-being. I'm depressed. They'll go through so many feelings, don't they, and emotions. And they're overwhelmed sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think a big part of it is like you said, the the educators, so the educational system itself, the way, universally, we're still struggling with, figuring out how to accommodate. You still get a lot of educators who say, that's not my problem, or I'm not trained in special needs education. You could just, Google it and then try to figure out ways around it. Especially educators and researchers and scholars, having decided to go into that, path in life, then there has to be a constant process of figuring out how to teach a diverse population of students. You don't necessarily always have the able-bodied student that, is going to understand and figure out exactly what you need and, be able to take your, paper-based exam. So I'm always so horrified when I hear the same kind of mentality. I'm not qualified to teach people with disabilities or people with special needs education.
It's called, we call it differentiation in the classroom, and not just that, it's compassion. As a human being, yourself, you've gone into education to help others, better others, but also you're there with children or young adults because you want to be. So you have to have some compassion and empathy. But you're right, some people close the door on it. I'm one of those people, I think I'm everybody's mother. I'm like Mother Goose. But I might not be able to find a solution, but I'll empathize with you and I'll listen to your query. I will try and find you then a solution. Yes, some things are out of my realm or remit because, I'm not technically paid for that, but I've got the experience for that. And and then sometimes there's a lot of red tape, so things don't change overnight. But it's beautiful that you're like me, you understand. And we do end up being like Mother Goose because we'll listen. We'll be compassionate. Absolutely. And also they know that you're the person to go to. You're not going to judge as well. Because you've learned not to.
Right? Absolutely. And I think that's a big part of this, the healing journey. So I think, we talked about pain, initially at the beginning of the episode. But when we talk about healing, or when we talk about how do you actually get from this point to that point, a big part of it is being able to connect with others. Whether you're an author or a teacher, or you work with people, or you work with children, whatever it is really, but being willing to kind of open yourself up and, extending something to others. And I think I've been really blessed that I was sort of able to do that, and also kind of take that initial step of saying, I will try this out, even if there's a risk factor to it, especially in our part of the world. Being able to say, I'm a woman who living with a disability. There can be a lot of consequences for that, whether in academia or whether in society. So immediately you're labeled as not qualified, not able enough, not smart enough,
There's a lot,
not.
a lot of barriers
Yeah,
before you get
there's a lot of
started.
barriers.
Yeah.
So I think that is the initial pushback against this stigmatization and against this ableism that we have in society. So what I've done is, with the books I've published, I've managed to kind of connect with readers all over. I get really, really interesting emails from or messages on Instagram from readers who say, I've never seen a book about a Muslim woman living with a disability, an Arab woman living with a disability, or someone in the Gulf region actually speaking so openly about what that means. And thank you. Now I want to write my own experience. I've been so ashamed. I've been so afraid. And I think that's kind of what's provided me with the sense of self-worth and purpose in life. It's really changed the way I look at not just myself, but at the idea of the body and how we think of the body. It's a sense of everybody's kind of going through the same the same difficulty, the same journey, and we're all really trying to navigate how do I actually fit in, whether fit in through this body or through community and so on.
Yeah. And I think it's beautiful that your books are a token and support for others, because you sometimes don't realize when you're writing your own books what the big impact of that book will be. I realized that when I started self-publishing years ago, and you go through that stage of, oh my God, am I doing the right thing? Should I publish this? And then when it's out there, it's out there. But then when you're getting heartwarming messages like you've just said, it really touches your heart, and it really makes you think, wow, I am supporting and I'm comforting, and I'm also giving like a security blanket to others, but also a bit like what your mum did to you. You're pushing them, you're following on that like message, aren't you, of you can do this, you can persevere with this, and somebody out there gets you, because yourself, quite a lot of females in your particular predicament, my particular predicament, there's so much racial stereotyping and prejudice in other books, prior to certain centuries, and we're typecast in many, many ways. So for having you write from an authentic voice, from an authentic standpoint, it has a big ripple effect, big ripple effect, because you're not only just speaking your mind, but you're changing the narrative too. And I'm proud of you of doing that. And we need more people like that, we do. So if there's other people that you're inspiring to write, I think that's friggin' amazing, as we'd say, So please keep up with that. She's welling up. She's welling up a little bit, bless her. But it's true, because not only are your students blessed to have you in the classroom, you're doing all these extra things, and been doing these different workshops. I've been following you on Instagram, and obviously in the bio for the podcast, we'll put your different links in. And if people want to purchase some of your literature, or look at it, or if they want to have a look at you on Instagram, I'm sure we can put that in the bio for those of you that are listening in, because Dr. Shahd has got some amazing work out there, and there might be other people listening to this podcast that can connect with you as well. But again, they're too shy. What are you currently working on at the moment, workshop wise? What have you been doing lately that we can let people know about?
Absolutely. So a big part of what I've realized is people want to be able to write about their traumas, but not in a kind of not alone. People don't want to do it alone. So I've been doing these workshops where we look at how do we actually write about our painful memories? How do we write about things that we otherwise are not ready to look at? So there's this idea of a safe space as you write. So you're kind of writing with others, not just writing alone. It's not an isolating experience. So that's what I've been looking at. I've been doing some short story writing too. for different age groups, and been working with really young, with a really young age group, so 11 to 14 years old. And I teach adults, so it was very interesting to be able to have that shift and to kind of look at the creativity that's amongst the younger groups.
Yeah.
And I'm always really interested in how we can actually begin to write about pain.
Yes.
So I'm hoping to also hopefully go a bit more into narrative therapy. I'm looking at different certifications that I can look into. I would really like to kind of pursue an alternative path. So I teach at a university, but I would really like to kind of open it up a bit, be able to work with older adults. Especially seniors. I feel like that's a group that tends to be really forgotten and really left behind, which is part of the age.
Yeah, and a lot of them do have the trauma. I think it's beautiful because you're doing that cathartic analysis, but you're also doing the psychoanalysis and purging, but not from a judgmental point of view. And going back to old-fashioned trends of journaling and pen writing and, nowadays with technology the way it is, which is amazing, don't get me wrong, going back to the basics of let's just think about this. It's beautiful. I think what you're doing is really beautiful and unique.
Absolutely. And the pen and paper thing is really funny. Also, in class, the students will use the, electronic devices, and we have a creative writing class. And a big part of this is me trying to get them to use the pen and paper again, because it does have a different cathartic effect once you hold the pen or pencil and you see your own handwriting on paper. There's a completely different psychological effect to being able to write that way. And they've kind of resisted initially, but then they've also said yes, it has a completely different effect having that tiny notebook in hand and carrying that kind of like your secrets, your personal experiences within that notebook rather than on the phone or on an iPad.
Yeah. A lot of people are sadly losing their motor skills, I've noticed, because we've become too reliant on the tech. And I'm guilty of this at times. I am seeing it from a special needs point of view. I'm seeing it that they're not able to hold their hand correctly. They get cramped. All of this has an effect, and this then causes more trauma within them because they're scared. But I think what you're doing is right. People do it with art therapy too, don't they? They do it in many other different forms. And one of the things I love about here is seeing the beautiful calligraphy in Arabic as well. So there's not just one language, not just English. You can write in many different languages as long as you are writing. I think that's the main message we want to get across. What you're doing, what you're doing is amazing. And before we finish, because obviously we're coming up to the point where we have to conclude, what have you got any particular final thoughts? I mean, are you happy to have people join your workshop if they're coming from abroad? Would you be happy to connect with others that might want to help you, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really kind of, I have this vision or this wish to, really expand. I am the only person working on disability and disability studies and, writing about disability in the Gulf region. And I really struggled to find a publisher. And I did eventually find a publisher, but it was a very long road. I'm hopeful that, the change is now, it just has started. So I'd like to go into how can we make films that are better representations? How can we get to change the way these television shows are also constructed? So I'm hopeful that I could also try something with script writing and screenwriting, and I'm working on a novel right now which I hope will turn into a movie. So there's this sense of also reaching a wider audience. That's my hope and my goal. Because again, while there's a nice population that reads, there's a larger majority that watches television and movies.
Yeah, it's multimedia and multisensory, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that is a whole different can of worms. Disability is still not represented in an authentic way for these Hollywood representations and Bollywood representations, and you name it, it's always the same kind of tragic ending. So I'm hopeful that I could do more to change that, and hopefully inspire other writers and other filmmakers and directors and people who are influential in whatever sphere they're in to kind of follow that same kind of mindset.
Good. I wish you all the best. I'm sure there'll be people listening in and, inspired by quite a lot of things that you've said today. And ladies and gentlemen listening, we will put her details in the bio. So please feel free to reach out to her and help her in any way that you can. Obviously, the more people we have, the podcast is international, so we don't know where people will be listening in. Some places in America, Canada, it's all over. So if there is anyone out there who's willing to help her, please get in touch. And I am so honoured that to have you. I don't think this is the last time we've had a little chat.
Absolutely.
I'm sure there's going to be several other podcasts, because it'd be nice to see you on your journey and to see where we go. And people like to listen in and see what the follow-up is. So thank you so much. Honestly, it's been such an honor to have you and giving this humble and honest outlook. Thank you very much for joining us on Raise Your Vibes.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for having me. I really enjoyed the chat. Thank you.